For the last few years, I think the majority of us have become very aware of the things that go on in places like Rochdale and Rotherham and Bradford, the city of culture, which disgusts me to my very core every time I hear it. And honestly, if aliens came to the UK today and asked for sort of a summary of the state of this country and how we handle security and sort of the threats to our people, I would show them everything I could about this topic, and in particular the vote that happened in Parliament this last week, which quite honestly exposed entirely the cover-ups that have been going on in regards to this topic within the establishment that had people labelled as conspiracy theorists and far right if they brought them up. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, this is the first podcast episode where I'm talking about the grooming gangs and all that kind of thing, but the more that we talk about this, the more people who speak up and talk about what's happened in the past week, and people like Tommy Robinson and this inquiry, and more recently what Nigel Farage has been coming out and saying. We're going to definitely cover that in this episode, but I'm going to be keeping the makeup a little bit more on the minimal side because this is more of a serious topic. If you guys aren't familiar with this channel, hello, my name's Anna. Welcome to Playing in Politics, which is my podcast channel where I talk about politics and normally do my makeup at the same time, but if I'm talking about a more serious topic, then I tend to keep the makeup to a minimum, or don't do anything like too extravagant. So yeah, this is a very, very important topic that more and more people should be talking about because it's being exposed on a public scale, which is fantastic. I mean, it's tragic and disgusting what's going on, and I'm sure that everyone knows, you know, I'm not necessarily going to be talking about specific cases and everything in that much detail, because I think at this point, if you're on this side of the internet, I think you already know. But I'm going to be talking about what happened with the vote this week, and also what Nigel Farage has been coming out and saying, kind of how he's changing his mind on things and how that's going to affect the Reform Party and all these different things. It's a mess. It is a mess, and obviously we've had these recent updates. So welcome back to Playing in Politics, where we're going to be exposing the establishment cover-ups of the grooming gangs and the violence towards young girls that's been happening in this country for way too long. With all jokes aside, I know that I probably shouldn't have started that with a hey, if aliens came to the earth. It was kind of the only way I could sort of make this a light-hearted thing, which we shouldn't be doing. I know I try, like the whole point of this channel in a way is to make these kind of topics a little bit more light-hearted because it is very heavy, this stuff. As I say, this stuff's being exposed on a public scale now, which it is funny how people like Tommy Robinson and like the EDL about like 20 years ago were called far right, and people who follow Tommy and people who speak out about this are still called far right. You know, we saw that last summer with the protests, and we're still seeing it with this kind of thing, and it is honestly a shame with how the general narrative, say on social media with Elon Musk taking over Twitter, you know, this kind of stuff is being able to be talked about a bit more freely, which is obviously a good thing, but to be able to normalise not calling these people far right and normalise just talking about this topic in an even more open way, I feel like needs to still happen. Like, there is some progress that still needs to be made, and I feel like this vote that's happened this past week is really going to help with that. And the one thing I want to start by saying when it comes to that and that vote result as well is, as much as I've been critical of the Conservative Party recently, even though I'm a paid up member, I've been quite open about that on this channel. If you're not, you know, if you've been in it for a while, is I just want to say well done to every single Tory MP and Reform UK MP that we have in Parliament at the moment for voting for this inquiry. It is so important that people recognise which parties actually care about this topic and about the national security of this country and about the real issues, and it really shows that Labour just aren't on the same page at all. Not that that's necessarily surprising, knowing their attitude and knowing what their attitude has been, you know, in the past. Not just Labour but independent candidates as well voted against this inquiry, including Jeremy Corbyn, which is not surprising. We all know, if you've been in politics for a while, we all know the kind of people he likes to buddy up with, and and even though he lost his whip obviously and has stayed as an independent candidate, I mean, it's a bit of a shock that he even kept his seat at the last election, if I'm being honest. I probably should have mentioned that in my last episode. You know, we all know the people that sometimes he's been photographed with, and honestly, if you still support Jeremy Corbyn in 2025, like, you're honestly a fool. Like, I'm just gonna say it as it is. It really baffles me that anyone can still sing his praises in 2025. But people still do, and I know that people still do, and it honestly just blows my mind, because the man is weird, and the man is an extremist and has, you know, been friends with terrorists, so, you know. And plus he was literally kicked out of the Labour Party for being an anti-Semite. Like, it was literally proved. They had, like, they did an investigation and they proved it, so you still support him? What are you doing? Yeah, it was just a really telling thing in a good way, because obviously conservatism in this country really needed that boost, and this really showed it, in my opinion. I'm gonna keep the eyeshadow like fairly neutral. I've got this big rich palette which I managed to get for like a tenner in like the Beauty Bay sale, and it's massive, so I'm gonna do something like kind of brown, reddish, neutral, kind of rusty red, brick red, brown kind of thing. As always, if you want to know what I'm using, all the products are always linked in the description. I tend not to talk about the makeup as much if I'm just kind of talking about these topics. So the next thing I want to mention, that like when the vote was called, obviously they had Kemi step up, and she was being actually very good when it came to calling Starmer out for, as we've just said, you know, clearly not caring about this topic, clearly in the defence of the vote, because, you know, we all know the type of groups that they're trying to keep voting for them, which is a big reason why they just have been really just not talking about this topic, and also a big reason why they were against the inquiry. We all know, we know what we know, and, you know, we can say it as it is and then, you know, move on, because I don't think that's going to change. Now, as I said, I've never really been a big fan of Kemi, but I can give her credit for the way she stood up in Parliament and called his ass out. You know, she has always been a very good speaker, and we have talked about that before, how she is a very good speaker, even though I don't necessarily think she's very good at like the action side of things. When it comes to actually speaking and calling people out in Parliament, she's very good at that. And as I say, you know, this isn't the first time that this topic is being talked about just at all. We've had people like Tommy Robinson, who has been a very controversial figure, and I'm glad in a way that people now are waking up to the reality of what he's like, rather than what the media are trying to portray. People always associate him, like in the summer they were associating him a lot with the EDL, and again calling him far right, racist, extremist, which made him had like come out and say, hey, the EDL's not been a thing for like 11 years. I shut it down because it was getting too much. Again, I think we've always pictured him as a bit of like a white supremacist in a way, which he just hasn't been, and I'm glad that people in the new media, primarily people like Maya Tusi, who, if you guys don't know, I used to be friends with, I still watch him on a regular basis, and he's good friends of Tommy's, and he's been really good at exposing the truth of what's been going on. And if you want a good kind of politics channel, kind of new media channel that's not me, go over to his channel. He's absolute #1. But when it comes to people like Tommy Robinson, who, by the way, should not be in Woodhill prison, that I mean, again, if you want kind of more personal accounts of that, my Tusi's channel is the place to go. But he should not be in Woodhill, he should not be in isolation, he should not be being treated the way that he is. Point blank period. It is disgusting, and that's kind of another expose of the establishment and the way that they treat people who just want to be telling the truth. So that's my 2 cents on that for now. But over the past couple of years, as I say, it's with like his documentary coming out and being released, and all the things that have come out, you know, with that, and even with the EDL, you know, as I say, he dismantled it because it was getting too much, and he's literally come out and, you know, said that, yeah, there are things in his past which he obviously regrets, and, you know, that if he could go back in time, like, he would do differently, which, you know, is a perfectly mature way to look at it. And, you know, we should all have moments in our lives where we look back at certain moments and think, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done it like done that way. He's obviously started all his activism when he was kind of young-ish, so obviously, you know, as you change and grow as a person, you know, you look back at certain decisions or things you said or whatever, and you think to yourself, yeah, I should not have done that, which is fair enough. And there are quite a few points where he's come out and said things like that, you know. But the one thing you can say is that he does care about his family, and he cares about his kids who are, you know, coming under fire. Like, his family are dealing with a lot right now from the media and just people being people, which is annoying, and obviously no kid should have to go through the kind of scrutiny that they're having to deal with because of things that he didn't even necessarily say, you know. It's a very, very messy situation. I do feel for him, quite honestly. You know, what happened to him and what is happening to him, as I say, should not be happening. And that's another thing as well that we should be talking about is, you know, the result and how we're treating the whistleblowers and the campaign people who are trying to expose this. Tommy being the front runner of that, you know. And it's funny in a way that we talk about Tommy, because to me, Tommy Robinson is to this topic what Nigel Farage was to illegal migration. Like, as I've said quite a few times on this channel, you know, if it wasn't for Nigel Farage and his boats in 2020 in Dover, we wouldn't know the severity of this topic. And it's the same with Tommy Robinson. And it's interesting because when Nigel started talking about the illegal migration back in 2020, like, everybody woke up to it. Like, almost it instantly became headlines, right? But Tommy's been talking about this for like 20 years, and only now have people started to wake up to it. So again, that exposes a lot about the establishment and the way that they treat this kind of thing. You know, the whole diversity is our strength narrative. And I mean, obviously we see that a little bit with the illegal migration topic as well, and obviously they do overlap, because the illegal migration is also directly contributing to the grooming gangs and this violence and the attacks and everything. And linking even further into that, it is even more ironic because of Nigel Farage and the stuff that he's been saying about Tommy Robinson recently. Now, Nigel has never really liked Tommy's methods. He's always come out and said this. He's always said, and even though people will try to claim like, oh no, Nigel actually really likes Tommy, like, behind the scenes. Again, going back to Maya Tusi, who I say is a friend of both Tommy and Nigel, and he's come out quite a few times recently to say, like, no, both publicly and privately, Nigel Farage's opinion on Tommy Robinson has not changed. Like, he has always had the same opinion, he's always had the same views, he's never liked Tommy's methods, because obviously Tommy is the type of person to come out on the streets and use megaphones and rally the people, which I guess Nigel just thinks he's too classy for, I don't know. But in a way, like, I can kind of respect that, you know, he does tend to rally quite a lot of, like, angry people, and I guess Nigel's a bit more about democracy and doing things kind of, as I say, in like a more classy and peaceful way, even though Tommy's rallies, especially recently in the past couple of years, have always been peaceful, you know, especially with like Israel and Palestine conflict protests and things, you know. You never hear of the pro-Israel protests gaining any arrests, but when it comes to pro-Palestine, we see all the violence, which, I mean, I've talked about that briefly in like a previous episode, but that's kind of died down a little bit, hasn't it? I feel like that's died down a bit. I'm sure it'll rear its ugly head back up as we get into like the warmer months, you know, as we get out of winter and more of these things start happening again. Yeah, so Nigel has never really liked Tommy, and he's never really come out and supported it, but until now, I don't think he's never really said anything nasty about Tommy, but obviously recently he's come out and just tried to do like a smear campaign. He's been spreading all these lies. The biggest one, I'd say, was when he came out, it was on LBC, and he was trying to claim that Tommy Robinson had like charges of violence against women against him, which is that's a complete lie. Like, that is a complete and utter lie. As Maya Tusi debunked that incident, he never pushed his it was an ex-girlfriend. I was gonna say it's his ex-wife, Jenny. It's not. It was an ex-girlfriend, but he didn't push her. It was like a drunk argument outside a bar or something, and he pushed a police officer. It was never like they were both drunk. Apparently this was like 2006 or something. It was like 20 years ago, and yeah, they were both drunk, but he never laid a hand on his ex-girlfriend. It was just the police officer, which obviously he shouldn't have done. We have a few clips of like phone calls from prison that people have managed to record and then put on the internet to kind of still be getting his statements on things, which I think is really important. Obviously, halfway through, like a good point, it cuts out because that's just how phones work in prison. Like, you'll be halfway through a rant and it'll be like, beep, beep, beep. It's like, no, he was doing a good job. Let him finish. That's just the way it works, I guess. But yeah, so he has come out and completely debunked that, which is good. But that was just kind of the beginning, really. As I say, he's always come out and said like, oh yeah, I don't support Tommy's methods. I think it was a bit before the LBC interview, he'd said that Tommy would be allowed in Reform UK because he was getting asked that in an interview, which obviously Tommy's not interested in party politics. He's not interested in joining a party. He has his own thing, so why that was even a question is crazy. Yeah, like, it was kind of fair enough that Nigel was like, yeah, no, he's not for us, but the question itself was stupid, so but like, that was tame. Like, we've started tame and we've got worse from there, you know. Like, it started tame and then obviously he came out with the lie about the violence against women charge when he was asked about it again on LBC, because they were like, oh, you've said this, like, is there any particular reason, like, give us more gossip on this? And he was like, well, he's got a conviction of like, violence against women. He's like, no, he hasn't. As I say, that was a complete lie. But then he's obviously gone one step further, which is like, Nigel, what the hell are you doing? Who's bought you? Like, what the hell? Like, who's paying you to say this? It's ridiculous. Because this is not the Nigel that at least I thought he was. He's been shocking me, quite honestly, with the stuff that he's been coming out with. It's been really bizarre and really quite disappointing. But the latest thing he said wasn't even really about Tommy, but like, this is a completely different topic. But on ITV, I don't know how many people know about this, but on ITV, on an ITV interview, he's come out about Shamima Begum. Now, as we all know, we know the story with Shamima. You know, this is about a 10-year-old story at this point. She went over to Syria as a teenager to join ISIS, and since then she's been trying to campaign to come back. I think we all remember the clip in, like, what was it, 2019 or something? I think it might have been even a bit after that, but then she's there, like, with her hair out, with, like, the little cap and, like, the tank top, like, hey, I'm a normal girl, let me back to the UK, which is like, what the hell? Very, very bizarre. It's an image that it's stuck in our heads, I'm sure, whenever we mention her name. And obviously we've always said, no, absolutely, well, the last Conservative government said absolutely not, no, you're gonna stay where you are in Syria, you chose that life, you're gonna stay over there, we do not trust you, which of course is the right decision. However, Nigel has come out now and said, oh yes, my instinct says no, I don't want her back, but it's been so many years now and the Syrian government, like the way that works over there, has changed to the point where maybe it'd be better if she was held in a UK prison. And it's like, Nigel, you have come out and said and been quite vocal about how broken the prison system is in this country, right? And now you're coming out and saying this? It's like, again, who's paying you? Are you okay? Are you feeling okay, Nigel? Do we need to hold your hand? Like, blink twice, please. It is absolutely baffling because, as I say, this is not the Nigel that we thought we knew. That's not the Nigel I thought I knew. And not only that, it's being backed up by the chairman of Reform UK, and he's basically said the same thing. Like, yeah, you know, obviously he's not like campaigning for her to come back, but you know, he's not saying openly like, yeah, but the conversation can happen, which is equally as dangerous. Like, I'm not even sorry to say, it is equally as dangerous to be like, oh yeah, the conversation can happen, because we know what the current government's attitude towards the justice and prison system is, right? Life does not mean life here anymore. We cannot to hear this was a bastion of border control. You know, as I say, we wouldn't know about the severity of this issue if it wasn't for his boat back in 2020, but now to hear him siding with more of, like, I dare to say, even like more of the open border and like the compassionate side of the spectrum when it comes to this issue is actually baffling. Like, this is Nigel Farage that we're talking about here. Nigel Farage. I also just want to add that he's basically saying that because the way Syria is kind of run the government and things have changed so much, that he basically believes that she's kind of no longer ISIS and she's no longer a threat, which, again, is like, this is Nigel. This is Nigel we're talking about. It just doesn't make any sense. Honestly, it's like, who's changed his mind? Who's made him talk like this? What has happened? I have no idea. I'd be less surprised if it was coming from Keir Starmer, knowing his background in law and the terrible ways that he handled some of his cases. Like, if it was coming from him, we would not be surprised, but it's Nigel Farage. It's Nigel Farage. Again, what is going on with him? It is absolutely baffling. I mean, I only learned about this ITV thing this morning, and it's especially considering that 2 years ago in a TV interview he was siding with the Conservative side at the time, which was saying absolutely no way, there's no way that she's ever going to get back into this country. So now that he's open to this conversation, again, bizarre. Honestly left me a bit speechless. It's crazy. Now obviously when it comes to this topic we do always have to say the obvious, in that there are two different versions of Islam, okay? There are two different variants of it, okay? When people say, oh, it's not all Muslims, it's not all Muslims, you know, you can't paint everyone with the same brush, it's like, right, okay, yeah, fair enough, because the variation of it that is encouraging the type of behaviour that we're seeing and these attacks and everything and the violence are following the book to the letter, okay? And according to that, the other type of Muslims aren't real Muslims. When we say it's not all Muslims, of course not. Of course not. And even people like Tommy Robinson would come out and say that, because, you know, he's been very vocal about, like, the EDL, like his organisations and things. At top positions in his organisations have been people of colour and people of different religions and things. And he's by all means not coming out and saying, you know, all Muslims are bad, all Muslims are the problem. Like the media will have us believe that that's his attitude, and has been his attitude for so many years now. Obviously that's now coming out as not being the case, which for people like me who for a long time were very much being brainwashed by the media, and a lot of people still are. Obviously a lot of people are still being brainwashed by the media, thinking as we've said, you know, that he's some sort of far-right thug and a racist and just a horrible person. Obviously, you know, and I used to be one of those people, but having turned to more like the YouTube side of politics and more like the more truth-telling side of politics, and exposing not only the mainstream media cover-ups but also like the establishment cover-ups within government, has been so eye-opening and actually so refreshing, and it's so relieving when you can start to see things for what they are, and you can stop living this life of complete hate of anybody that the media says to hate. Once you start looking at things with a bit more nuance and a bit more, with more of a critical thinking, you know, brain and eye, it honestly just takes such a weight off, and then you know, like, truly what the problem is and truly who we should be going after, and not, as I say, just following almost cancel culture when it comes to these people who are just trying to protect certain groups because they're scared of what they're going to do or what they're going to say, that kind of thing, which we have been seeing over the past few years. But as I've said, with all of this from the beginning of this episode, it's so important now that we see that vote and we see the voting result and we see what's happening with Tommy Robinson and the way that he's being treated, and we start waking up to this cover-up and the fact that this vote really just exposed it on such a massively public scale as a turning point where we can, as I say, start going after the actual bad guys and not the ones that we thought were the bad guys, you know? As soon as we stop being puppets to the mainstream media, the better. I got a bit of blue mascara in my concealer there. That was not fun, but oh well. Going back to the mainstream media point, and I preach this to people in my life all the time, is stop watching the BBC, stop watching mainstream media, just absolutely point blank period, because if you're still of the mindset that you can trust everything that you're hearing from these people, then you have some waking up to do, you have some learning to do, and the best way to do that is as they stop watching the mainstream media, because we have seen a certain narrative, and as I've said a couple of times in this episode, there is a certain group of people that they're trying to protect, and they have been protecting for years, and certain governments have been protecting, which, as I say, that the vote very clearly showed this week. And it's a shame that these people have been called conspiracy theorists and racists for so long, but it's so vindicating now that the truth is finally coming out. And I feel like more people really do need to be waking up to that truth, and the new media and following people on YouTube who are telling the truth and are friends with Tommy Robinson and, you know, are exposing exactly what's going on, because the mainstream media is not going to give you all the facts. The mainstream media is going to give you some of the facts, but then it's going to twist the rest of it as much as it can. And as I say, the fact that people are starting to wake up to that now is so good. And also, when it came to Parliament this week after the vote was called, there was a Reform UK MP who stood up in Parliament and was asking all of the right questions and saying all the right things and really calling for change. And this Labour MP stood up after him and basically had like a whole meltdown, saying that like him talking about this topic openly and saying that something needed to be done was somehow damaging to the victims and survivors. Like, it was very bizarre. And like with any case of SA or any kind of violence, especially when it comes to young girls, which is what we've been seeing obviously over the past few years, just so many. And as this Reform UK MP was saying, like, how many? Like, we don't know how many it is, and we should, and it's crazy that we don't. The fact that we've let this be swept under the rug out of fear of this group in this country, who a lot of which shouldn't even be in this country as well, is insane. And they all are coming from kind of one country who we are weirdly friends with, you know, like it's really baffling. But as I say, the more that we talk about this, the more that this can get exposed. But now that it's been exposed on such a public scale, I feel like this is just gonna get the ball rolling in the best way when it comes to this topic, which is the best thing we can do for the families of the victims and the survivors. And again, you know, I want to emphasize this is not a sweeping statement with everyone from places like Pakistan. Like, I know people in the Conservative Party who are from there who are perfectly nice and would never dream of doing what these monsters are doing. But the difference is that those people I know who are great people came here legally, came here through the right means, and we are letting in these completely unvetted monsters, as I say, into this country and just letting them wreak havoc, and we're not doing enough about it. And unfortunately, the fact that this government voted against a national inquiry into this topic shows that unless we really push, and obviously we are going to keep pushing, we're never going to stop talking about this until something is really done. But with this current government, it's going to really take a push, because they clearly are still very much in the game of keeping their seats and protecting the votes. In the meantime, we really need to be championing people who are talking about this in the right way. So people in the Conservative Party who voted for this inquiry, which, as I say, is every single one of them. You know, you can look up a list of all the names. I'm gonna have to turn my light on, by the way, because it's going dark. There we go. That's a bit better. Okay. But yeah, so people from the Conservative Party, people from Reform, depending, you know, you can write to your local MP and say, well done, you know, I'm behind you on this. Which, if you're in a constituency that has a Labour or an independent MP, I'm so sorry, but it's most likely that you're not going to be able to congratulate them. As I say, you can look up the full list. Like with every vote, the full list of who voted for what is always public. But also people like Elon Musk, who's always been very good at tweeting about this, and obviously X is now the free speech platform. Obviously Mark Zuckerberg's come out and kind of been very open about the kind of censorship rules that he had to abide by because of the Biden administration, but that was kind of more about the vaccines and COVID times. But hopefully we see places like Facebook and Instagram being more open about this kind of thing and being more open to free speech. He's kind of joining the good guys with his long hair now, which is nice to see, I suppose. But yeah, so the conclusions I want to make from this, as I say, I just want to reiterate the point that this isn't all Muslims. The Muslims who are advocating for cousin and child marriages are the people we need to be going after, but the other type that they don't believe are real Muslims are the type we need to be protecting. Well, not really protecting, but the type that we need to not be attacking, because this is as I say, not all Muslims. I do just want to say real quick as well, if you know anyone or if you personally have experience with this kind of disgusting behaviour, if your daughter is a victim or a survivor, I deeply am so sorry that the establishment has failed you for so long and is only just starting to come to the surface, and the people who are fighting for this are only just being believed, because I know if you've been trying to speak out based on your personal experience and you've been being shut down by the establishment, I know how painful that must be. And let me be absolutely clear, when we say in this country that we should be protecting kids from violence and protecting kids from grooming, this is what we should be talking about. This is the topic that we should be talking about. We should be talking about the rape gangs and the grooming gangs, who are all led by the same group of men who all have the same kind of ethnic background and most likely come from the same country, and 9 times out of 10 will have come to this country on a boat or through some kind of illegal means. You know, I forgot how nice this lip gloss was, by the way. It's really nice. And as I have said throughout this is going to be like my closing thoughts because it's going dark. We need to keep talking about this. Don't stop talking about this just because it's been exposed on a public scale now. As I've said, that we keep championing the people who are talking about this in the right way, the faster that something can be done. I pray for Tommy Robinson that he survives jail fairly unscathed. I know that he's, as I say, if you've listened to the phone calls that have been released, he's doing okay, but he is obviously in isolation, and I honestly think that this is the start of a much bigger expose, so let's hope that that is the case, and I will see you guys in the next episode.